So, I mean, first of all, very warm welcome. It's kind of still strange to me that we can be meeting from all over the world without actually meeting. There's a part of me wishes we were gathered somewhere and we could be chatting around the corners of the room and uh, see, yeah, seeing one another in person. But on the other hand, the convenience of this is fantastic. So it's a great joy. Um, This is the first time we have run a conference really about the thinking about mediation clinics. But I just wanted to begin with a little bit of a word about mediation clinics themselves. The idea still is a relatively new one and a relatively obscure one. Um, to many people, you say the word clinic, it's associated with medicine, and like many good things, nothing wrong with that origin. It wasn't stolen first by mediators, but by lawyers. So I just want to say three things really about mediation clinics, not a history by any means, but just to draw attention to some points. I mean, first of all, what on earth were lawyers doing thinking about clinics? Well, there's a tradition in the US, really, and a lot of these ideas do come from the US, of one particular scholar, and then many others drew a distinction between law in the books and law in action. Or you might say between law as an abstract concept and lawyering, which is what lawyers are actually up to. And really, that changed legal education in the US and has probably influenced legal education all over the world. I would, well, in many parts of the world, certainly the English-speaking world. And I suppose I might characterize it as recognizing that it's not just a matter of learning a series of abstract concepts. At some level, if we're to become skillful professionals, we have to learn what to do. So it's not just learning what, it's learning what to do. So I think that's one component of the drive towards law clinics initially, and mediation clinics followed relatively soon after in the US, not here. Um, my second point is really about so that's really learning what to do. My second point is about the nature of mediation itself. If you look at the way mediation's taught, again, as far as I can see, there may be exceptions. It's largely based around some sort of simulation, some sort of scenario. People who are learners are expected to take part in exercises which effectively replicate some of what we're going to do. And I think that's a more traditional idea. I'm sure many of you have come across it, learning by doing. And I think the idea of, in many regards, the idea of a mediation clinic seems blindingly obvious. Learning by doing, that's what we do. And therefore, we want to put that into the service of the community, into the service of the world. So I think another obvious connection is mediation clinics is something, as soon as you become involved in any kind of academic institution, you don't just want to cram people's heads full of academic knowledge. They still need to acquire the skills. They need to be learning by doing. And then finally, one even much, much more ancient idea I want to link this to is the ancient idea of an apprenticeship, which I suppose is learning while doing. You know, we emerge from our training courses with a sketchy, at best, picture, a patchwork of skills, perhaps tapping into some of our existing skills, perhaps beginning to make connections. But of course, we're going to improve, especially doing something as tricky and complex as mediation. And I think it's turned out the mediation clinic in University of Strathclyde is as much about an apprenticeship as it is about the student experience. And many of our mediators are graduates and are people who are building their experience and getting better, improving. So I think there's different strands of thinking that probably feed in to what mediation clinics are all about. And I hope, as I say, this is a first for us. We're going to now turn to four people from different places. We had hoped to have another continent represented. Sadly, Jessica from Nigeria is unable to join us. So the first speaker she's unwell actually. She's been unwell for a wee while. So we will have somebody. We'll start with Roy Points, who we'll introduce everybody now, Pauline, or we do them one at a time. I think I'll just briefly say, so Roy is part of the mediation clinic here at University of Strathclyde, and he's going to give us his particular wisdom on really about our ideas about the way we practice. We're then turning to, where are you? I'm looking for you. Sanaya from India. Will you just wave? Thank you. Who's going to be speaking to us really about some ideas from mediation ethics. It'd be interesting to relate that to what we're up to in the mediation clinic. Then we'll take some time for question and answer. I think that's going to be an important component of this. Then after the break, we will turn to Patrick Scott, also mediates in the mediation clinic. And at this point, I realize that I had my program open on a different computer. So I might actually have to ask Patrick to introduce himself. So to my chagrin, I can no longer remember each of the topics on the program. So forgive me for that. But Patrick, I think, do you want to just shout out, Patrick? Just tell us in a sentence your topic.
Thanks, Charlie. In a sentence, I'm going to talk about the intake process and the two options available to clinics for the intake process.
Fantastic. And fantastic as well, because it chimes with tons of research and tons of the reading I'm doing, which is about the work we do before we even get people into the mediation and the importance of it. So thanks, Patrick. And then finally, again, where are you? Katerina, there you are. Would you mind introducing yourself, Katerina? Just briefly, your topic to finish the...
Okay, my topic is student as a hope of mediation in the Czech Republic.
Fantastic. So we're going to have another perspective from another European country. So welcome all. I think without further ado, unless there's anything else I need to say, Pauline, we will take time for questions. Probably after Roy and Sanaya have spoken, we'll take a pause at that point. So I'm going to hand over now to Roy Points.
Good, thank you. What I'm going to talk about here today is a particular aspect of the mediation clinic at University of Strathclyde, which is the peer support sessions. It's one of the things that we have which encourages the learning of our practitioners. And those are offered throughout the year. It's an opportunity for practitioners to come along with case studies and explore them. And we were sitting down one day and talking about how this should come together. We figured that it was important to focus this on the individual and have something that was particularly focused on them. And then I logged into the thought, well, where's all this supposed to be leading us? And I suggested to Charlie that it should be leading us to what Schön calls a personal theory of practice, to which he gracefully challenged me and said, Roy, you'll have to explain that and unpack that for us. So this is an attempt to unpack that for this audience here tonight. I should say I'm only going to try and give you a flavour of the subject. I have written about 2 pages with some references, etc. Pauline assures me that that will be available on the website at a later conference website, so you'll be able to pick it up from there. And the other thing that I'm bringing into play, my experience of education prior to actually coming to the university to do my master's was that the basic 40 hours of training that one receives as a mediation is so far so good, but there must be more to mediation than that. And I found a world of theory in doing the master's degree, and I think that gives all of the people that come through the clinic a unique opportunity in terms of their learning. Personally, I've always been fascinated by what drives our thinking as mediators, and I went and did a PhD elsewhere, and I'm going to draw on some of that research here tonight as we go through. So, with that just introduction, let me just move on to the first slide. So, just to ask a question, what is mediation? I mean, that might sound pretty obvious to you, but it's not necessarily that obvious. I've included a picture of an elephant here because that's reminiscent of a cartoon you may have seen where you ask people that only see a fraction of the element what it is that they are said to describe it, and they all describe different things. And it reminds me of an occasion, Charlie, you may remember this, where we sat in a lecture theatre in Edinburgh, and Ken Cressell was showing a video of family mediation practice in the US courts. And it was all very efficient from his point of view, but afterwards the audience just got completely incensed. There were cries of, "That's not mediation." And we kind of make this assumption that mediation is mediation is mediation, but it's not. It depends very much about context, but it also has a distinctly personal element into it. And as we start to practice, we start to realize what's going on here. So sometimes what's obvious isn't necessarily, and understanding that and digging into that is a way of progressing and developing as a mediator. I mean, I would ask the question, what does 2 + 2 equal? And you'll all say to me, it's obvious, it's 4. And this may go back to my earlier days as an engineer. I'm going to suggest to you that that's a common assumption and something we work with from day to day. But those of a more mathematical bent would be able to tell me that 2 + 2 could equally be 10, or it could be 11. And I remember a sermon where the minister was trying to tell us what was sure and what was faith, what you had to believe. And he said 2 + 2 = 4. Well, it's not necessarily so. And there's an invitation here to start unpacking things. The other thing that we've become aware of as we grow as mediators is that there is a spouse theory, the stuff we learn. And if you ask us, this is what we say we're doing. When we look back or somebody observes us, there's the theory and action, and they don't always align. So there's a lot going on in mediation that as we go on, we learn that there's a personal element, people do it differently. These are all impact on our ability to learn. So a couple of things just to think about in terms of diving deeper into this subject. I'm just going to flag them here. I'm not going to go into great detail. Cressell, a US researcher, makes an interesting point. Mediation is a really complicated thing. There's just so many moving parts. We just can't handle it cognitively. So what we do is we simplify things, we adopt a personal style, and that dictates the choices we make within mediation. And he says that personal style has 2 elements: the models, the formal learning that we have, the stuff we learn in basic training. That's explicit. You can see it, touch it. Although in my experience, a lot of mediators haven't really thought about the models that they use, and then there are the personal schema that are implicit, subconscious, that we need to unpack because they dictate how we go about things, how we make the choices that we make. Stern is probably the reference point in terms of any reflective practice that we do. and he talks about single and double loop learning. And those are important characteristics in how we go about working through and learning. And he is the person who coins the expression of personal theory of practice. And in the very simplest terms, that's theory informs our practice then enables us to build theory, and then we practice and we build theory, and we go on from there. And I'm going to suggest to you that everybody has a personal theory of practice. When I did my research, when I came across one group of workplace mediators who came from a coaching background, and it clearly influenced how they practice mediation. So we all have a personal theory of mediation, and I think it's good to bear that in mind and to think about how we actually make that explicit. And the final point I wanted to make here, we are always in our learning trying to integrate things, pull it all together into some coherent fashion. The challenge for us as mediators is whether we do that eclectically, a kind of pick and mix, and whether that makes any coherent sense. And starting to articulate a personal theory of practice starts to bring that together. And that's what we can actually hope to move forward to when we're talking about what we can achieve in a practice session, a peer support session. So if you look at the usual models that we use for mediated learning, right at the very beginning in basic training, I've loved doing this over a number of years in the teaching. You start off, you don't know what you don't know. As you go into the training, you start to realize that mediation is a bit more complicated than you believed at the beginning. You move into conscious incompetence. You realize this is going to be tricky. And then hopefully with support, with training, with practice, those role plays that Charlie talked about, you get to a stage of conscious competence. You're kind of doing it, but you're aware it's a bit effortful. And hopefully you come through that 40-hour training with a degree of what's called unconscious competence. You're doing it, you're starting to flow to do that. And eventually, as you go on and practice and building up your knowledge and building up your theories, you get to what I would say is habitual practice. You can do things with a degree of fluency. But thereafter, I'm going to suggest to you, and the literature suggests this as well, it's what Lang talks about, or Lang and Taylor talk about, achieving flow in mediation. And I think it's when we are less focused on the problem or the solution that we can actually pay heed to the interaction which is going on in the mediation. And I think if you experience that, you know what it is. And I'm going to suggest to you in general that the type of questions that we ask ourselves at the beginning of this process are typically what and how questions. Charlie referred to it earlier. What do I need to do? How do I need to do it? And we're quite, as less experienced mediators, we tend to rely on the more experienced mediators to kind of guide us through. We try and emulate what they do. That takes us so far. That's single loop learning. What we need to get to, where we're headed, I would suggest to you, is that our why and who questions, starting to test the assumptions that we use. And who questions, just really trying to understand our own personal schema, the values, the beliefs. Why do we behave the way we behave in mediation? What's governing our overall theory? So, what this particular clinic affords is an opportunity to practice. That's clearly there. It's an opportunity to flag. That's, amongst other things, the peer support session. And we come together on a regular basis to do this. But critically, it gives us the tools to enable a systematic and critical integration. Because I think one of the challenges for mediators without that base is that you don't have any critical appreciation of what's been said. It just becomes a mishmash. And I think that's a benefit that we have as members of the mediation clinic. And I'm going to suggest it starts to get us to realize what those cogs are that are actually moving in our brains in terms of moving toward heedful performance and a personal theory of practice. Because Charlie went on to challenge me and said, well, how do you get to a personal theory of practice? And I'm going to suggest a few things to you here that might help you move in that particular direction. And I think a basic precept of learning, certainly learning at double loop, a deeper level, is to become unsettled, because otherwise you're just improving on what you know. And I'm going to suggest that there are four approaches that you might consider. First is metaphors. These are really powerful ways that we use to express mediation. So, for instance, I once asked a group of community mediators I was working with, could they come up with a metaphor that they would use to describe to a participant in mediation what the role of the mediator was? And one of the participants that night came up and said, I see myself as a referee, which was interesting because everybody howled him down. They clearly didn't see the mediator as a referee. That was too directive for him, for them. But he unpacked what he meant by referee, and you started to understand some of the thinking behind it. So think about the metaphors that you might use to describe mediation. Think about the metaphors that you might use to express your role as a mediator and unpack them. You'll realize some of the thinking that's behind that meta theory there. Me personally, I'm wrestling with a metaphor of a catalyst. Mediator is a catalyst. How does a catalyst work? Well, it provides an active surface. The mediator is very much part of that conversation. At least that's how I see and enact and perform mediation. Others may look at that metaphor and read different things into it. But metaphors can be quite helpful. Underlining assumptions. If you think about, we all know what we know until we start to unpack it, and you realize that people actually have different ways of looking at things, even what the goals of mediation are. What do you consider success in mediation? In the paper, you'll see that I've referred to a set of research that I use for interrogating mediators and understanding what was going on in their practice. I think critiquing theory can be helpful, and I've given you a couple of examples in the paper, one of which is Liz Stokoe. I think Liz is brilliant if you've ever heard her in terms of the insight she brings to mediation from conversational theory. But she wrote some stuff which said that actually, in her view of mediators, they all are lined up to have solution-focused questions. I'm not convinced about that, but I think it's interesting to engage in it and see why you don't think that. So engaging with the theory, particularly that might unsettle your view of mediation, can be really helpful. And the expression always is, don't sweat the small stuff. However, in mediation, the small stuff is the interesting things because they can, again, reveal some of the choices that we make. So even something as simple, once you've gathered everybody together in a mediation, in deciding which of the parties should speak first. And in basic training, you'll probably, you go with the claimant. And that's kind of conventional way of doing it. But there are other ways of doing that. In fact, you could even ask, you can ask the parties who would like to speak first. You could even ask the parties who would like to listen first. There are a number of ways of doing that. How you do that I found when I was interviewing mediators, and I think for myself, is characteristic of my view of uh, how I want to project myself as a mediator, how I want to understand, how I view people, how trustworthy they are, how they're able to interact with each other, at what stage I want to emphasize collaboration. So there's all sorts of things that guide us in our choice of the small stuff, which will tell us some of our own theories of practice. So I think that's all the slides I have here. You'll catch more in the paper. Happy to answer questions, and I will just pause at that stage.
Fantastic, Roy. Thank you so much. I'm sure there's quite a lot in that, and I'd like to have a go at it myself. But I think what I'd like to do is, as I said, we'll move on. I'm turning to Sanaya. We'll turn to you now, Sanaya. If I could invite you to also give us your presentation, and then we'll take a pause for questions on both, if that's okay.
Sure, sir. I'll just share my slides.
Yeah, we're hearing you.
Okay, good evening, everyone. So, first of all, I would like to thank you all for inviting me for this and for choosing me for this presentation. So, my name is Sania Khan, and I'm from India. Currently doing second year. Currently, I'm in second year BLLB honors at Vidyashilp University, Bangalore. So, today I am very thrilled to present on the topic of integrating ethical principles for clinical mediator education. So, first of all, I would like to say what is mediation. So, mediation is a powerful tool for resolving disputes, and ethical practices are at the heart of making it effective and trustworthy. So, while we are going forward, let's dive into why this matters and how we can improve the training of mediators to meet the challenge of the real world. So, clinical mediation is more than just helping people resolve disputes. It's about creating a safe, fair, and productive environment where trust and respect thrive. Ethical principles are not just theoretical, they directly influence the success of mediation by ensuring all parties feel heard and respected. This study aims to bridge a critical gap, embedding strong ethical foundations in mediator training to better prepare them for complex real-life scenarios. So, the role of ethics in mediation is really the mediation. When we talk about mediation, it basically built on trust. So, trust comes from fairness and transparency. So, ethics ensure mediators to treat all parties equally, fostering an atmosphere where participants feel comfortable sharing openly. And beyond fairness, ethics guide mediators in managing emotionally charged situations, helping them maintain neutrality and navigate conflicts of interest. So, in today's world, mediator also.
Sanaya, can
Sure.
I just briefly say we're not seeing any of your other slides. We're still seeing the first one, but I think as you're speaking, I think you will need to
Oh,
click
sorry.
on further slides if we're going to see them. I don't know if you can see. There's a button that says slideshow. You might be able to give us one after another.
Is it?
No, we're still just seeing the first one. Unless you want to send the slideshow to Pauline, who might be able to advance it for you.
I think you need enable editing, and then you can do the slideshow.
Can you say that again to us? I think that's Cordelia.
Yeah, sorry. If you look at the top, you have a yellow band where it says enable editing. I think you need to click that before it will let you do anything else with your document. Yeah, so if you click that and then you can maybe choose your slideshow.
That makes sense. Thank you, Cordelia.
Okay.
That's really helpful. And then from beginning, if you go over to the
Is
top,
it now?
if you click from beginning at the top or from current slide, either.
Yeah.
Here we are. And now you should be able to advance the slides by clicking. Haha. Lovely. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah. So the role of ethics in mediation is, as I told in today's words, mediators also face new challenges like privacy concerns in virtual mediations, making ethical frameworks even more important. And also, when we talk about mediation, there are core principles of mediation like confidentiality, neutrality, and informed consent, which are the pillars of strong foundation. And confidentiality protects the sanctity of the process but requires careful balancing in cases like mandatory legal reporting. And also, neutrality sounds straightforward but can be tricky in situations with power imbalances or biases. Informed consent means more than just a signature, it's about ensuring all parties genuinely understand and agree to the process without pressure or confusion. While we have the principles of mediation, we also have the challenges in ethical mediation, which are the let's take an example. If we imagine a scenario where confidentiality clashes with the mediator's legal obligations, so how do we decide what's right there? And also cultural differences can make ethical standards feel inconsistent, and what's considered fair in one context might not align with another. So, virtual mediations, though convenient, brings its own set of problems. So, how do we ensure privacy and genuine consent when people aren't in the same room? So, these challenges highlight why training mediators with robust ethical tools is crucial. So, I have proposed the curriculum for mediator education to tackle these challenges. As I have said, so the focus is on ethics right from the starts. This isn't about adding a few lectures on topics, it's about weaving ethics into every aspect of training. For example, case based learning can stimulate real world scenarios, helping mediators practice problem solving. Reflective practices like journaling and supervision encourage mediators to critically evaluate their actions and decisions. Finally, cultural competence training, which ensures that mediators respect and adapt to the diverse values of the people they are helping. And the teaching methods, effective teaching is about making ethics tangible and practical. Role playing exercises bring ethical dilemmas to life. Mediators can practice navigating tough situations before they encounter them in real life. Case studies and depth, allowing mediators to learn from real examples. Cross cultural training acknowledges the global nature of disputes today, preparing mediators to adapt while staying fair and impartial. And going forward, when we talk about the global and versus Indian approach about the clinical mediation, so globally, mediation ethics have been more systematically developed. For instance, the US, United States, and UK have established standards that emphasize confidentiality and neutrality, while Australia integrates cultural competence into training. In India, ethical mediation practices are often shaped by traditional norms, but we lack a standardized framework. There's a significant opportunity to develop a cohesive national approach, combining global best practices with India's unique cultural and legal landscape. So, when we adapt ethics to cultural context, Cultural adds a layer of complexity to ethical mediation. What's considered neutral or fair in one culture may feel biased or unfair in another culture. So, mediators must be culturally sensitive without compromising universal ethical principles. This requires balancing respect for traditions with a commitment to fairness and trust. So the recommendations for this to strengthen mediation in India. So I have proposed the following things, which are the to develop a national curriculum that makes ethics a priority, and also regular workshops and refresher courses can keep mediators updated on evolving ethical challenges. And cultural sensitivity training isn't just an add-on; it's essential for ensuring mediations works in a diverse society like ours in India. And to sum up with the conclusion, ethics are the backbone of effective mediation. They ensure fairness, trust, and credibility, which are essential for resolving disputes peacefully. By integrating an ethics first approach into training, we can prepare mediators to handle the real world challenges they'll face, whether it's in person, virtually, or across cultures. I believe this effort can evaluate mediation in India, making it a preferred method of conflict resolution globally. Thank you, and I look forward to your questions. Thank you so much.
Fantastic, Sanya. Thank you for telling me how to pronounce your name. And I really, really appreciate the work that you've put into this. Thank you so much. You should be able to press a little red button. That's it. And I might remove your spotlight now so you can go back into the crowd. So that's two fascinating, contrasting, and yet somehow complementary presentations. So at this point, we're at 5:45. I'm going to invite questions, comments, clarifications from anyone in the audience. You can either maybe use your hand up. There's an electronic way of doing it, or you could try to actually raise your hand or use the chat if you want to use that to put a question in writing for either of our speakers. Sanya, you have a question yourself? I'm guessing it's for Roy. Hello?
Yes, sir.
Go ahead.
Yeah, so my question is that as I am from India, so I haven't been from outside the India. So I have been like from childhood, I have very fascinated to see the like from outside. So I'm basically from Kashmir and I'm studying in Bangalore. So it's very fortunate for me to attend this seminar, and also so I am very like I can't express like I'm very happy to join this meeting. I would like to ask question like how really the the mediators life will be there in US, like in UK, and how do they approach a client when the client comes to them? How do they approach initially to them? So this is the question because I am very like enthusiastic to know that how the outside India mediation works and all those things.
Thank you, Sanya. Before and Roy may want to comment, but can I just suggest that in your final question, I think Patrick's presentation after this break may be quite helpful. I'm hoping in addressing your question and will give us at least one one glimpse of an approach to that from Scotland. I don't know if anyone, if Roy has a comment. I see a couple of questions are also appearing. Roy, any comment on Sanya's question?
No, I think you're right. We'll hear more from Patrick. I think it is fascinating that, in a sense, there's a common thread in terms of what we do as mediators. You know, you'd recognise some aspects of that in everybody's practice. However, that can be deceptive. You know, you may feel that you're mediating with exactly the same objectives as somebody else, and maybe you're not. And I think there's a distinct cultural aspect to that. I suspect there is an interesting personal aspect to that. I noticed Sanya was using terms like neutrality. And I think that's one of the kind of basic ones that we learn right at the beginning. And then as we go on as mediators, you think, oh, what does that mean? What sense does it make? And I think we all answer that differently. Probably we come to saying neutrality has kind of hints of judges and objectivity. Maybe mediation is more about impartiality than neutrality. All of these things, as we grow as mediators, we have the received wisdom we start with, the espoused theory, and then we kind of learn more as we go. And I think that's very natural, and that's a useful part of it. I guess my pitch is really to be systematic about doing that.
Thanks, Roy. Thomas, I see you've got your hand up, but actually, can I just Cordelia posed a couple of questions in the chat? Is that okay? We'll turn to them. I mean, first of all, there's a question for you, Sanya. Cordelia's asking, what steps have you taken to get your curriculum suggestion put into practice?
So right now, I'm a second year LLB student in university. So as my juniors are doing this subject called as alternate dispute resolution, and when we have started, they have started a teaching in a very lecture kind of thing. But when I was writing like paper, as I have submitted a draft of the paper where the things I have told my professors to convert it to the practical, as compared to the lecture thing, you should try to be the practical way, because it's more like a practical thing, not like a lecture. You give a lecture in the classroom and we study like that. We just imagine, we just write a notes, all those things. But in practically, if we see that will come under us, what exactly is mediation. So right now my juniors are doing, like, we have moot court competitions also happen, mediation competitions also happen. So these are the things which we do. It's initial steps which I have proposed in curriculum, like that we initially make the training sessions for them. For that, we are like initial stuff. We For us, it's initial stuff for us right now to get into the mediation. So if we right now go into the training, like from the university perspective, from university itself, so it would be a better for me. Also, I have done the mediation competition also in university, my juniors are doing. So this is the little things as I am trying to develop. So these are the things going forward. I might do the more thing. Thank you.
Yeah, and perhaps one day you may get to deliver some of the curriculum, if you keep going on the trajectory you seem to be on. Thanks very much, Sanya. It sounds like quite a lot to be doing in second year law. I wanted to turn to Cordelia's other question. Just come back to you, Roy. Can you explain double loop learning a little more, please? And Cordelia might be asking that on behalf of a number of people on the call. me included.
Let me try and do justice to it. I'm going to start by kind of comparing it and contrasting it with single loop learning. And I think the essence of single loop learning is something went wrong, how do we fix it? And it's back to those what and how questions. And that's useful learning. There's no doubt about that. And I think especially at the as you're gathering experience, it just getting that sense of competence, even conscious competence, that's just helpful. Double loop learning is not what do we put right, it's what do we learn. And it's those why and who questions. So it's starting to test some of the assumptions that we make rather than just simply going around within that framework, and it broadens things out and you start to unpack things. So a subject like neutrality, I think is good to teach at a basic level as you go through. And I think that's the essence of double loop learning. You start unpacking those and say, why neutrality? Why is that important? I know I learned that, but why is that important? And what's it trying to do? Are there other ways of doing it? So it's a deeper level of doing that. And I think I would include the why questions in there, but also the who, the human being that we bring to that with all our values and beliefs, because those influence how we practice, but they require a little bit more depth of reflection and focus in order to realize actually that does drive us in different directions. It's what Kressel calls the cognitive underbelly of practice. It's that implicit area we never really unpack, but nonetheless it guides us through all that we do.
Cordelia, do you want to come back on any of that?
No, I think I'm going to just process it a little bit, but that is helpful. Thank you, Roy.
That's great. Thanks. So, Tom, you patiently had your electronic hand up for a few minutes. Do you want to ask a question? Oh, has Tom frozen for us?
A couple
Tom,
of questions for Sania. I'm muted. No, I'm not. I have a couple of questions for Sania. Could you tell me, Sania, in India, is there a kind of dominant style of mediation predominates like there is in the UK, facilitative mediation? But if there isn't, if there are multiple styles of mediation, how are you going to get an integrated ethical framework that suits them all? Because I know in the United States, they've had great difficulty in bringing all the proponents of the different styles together to agree on a unified ethical framework, mainly surrounding the issue of neutrality and impartiality. Because evaluative mediators feel they can intervene in the process, which makes them, to a certain extent, non-neutral, because they are advising and taking sides perhaps with one party rather than the other. Narrative mediators feel they cannot be truly neutral. So how in India, if you're going to create a common ethical framework, how's that going to be done?
Yeah, sure. Thank you for your question. So basically, first we had the Arbitration Act, alternate dispute resolution. So later on 2023, we had the Mediation Act, which is Mediation Act 2023. In that act, we have the qualifications of the mediation, how mediator will be, what are the qualities should be in the mediation, and we also have the court annex. Literally, basically, we have court annex mediation. So in 2023, in 2023 Mediation Act, we have where we have mediator. So mediator will be like as I have presented in my presentation, that it should be the neutral party, where the qualification should be where we first, when we approach to the mediator, there shouldn't be any personal relationship between parties and between the mediator. So those are the things. Basically, the thing is, whenever we go for mediation, we have to look for the mediator who is not uh, like personal relationship between them, and all, and is not biased. And we have to mainly stick to the Mediation Act, which is Mediation Act 2023, which is the court annexed. Yeah, that's the
Okay.
thing.
Thank you. So these are basically based around the facilitative model, which most, I would think, ethical principles seem to be. But how do you fit in the other types of mediation into that? Has that been considered at all in India? Is it a problem? Is there any argument about the kind of structure of the ethical principles in India as there has been in the United States?
Ethical principles, if we talk about India, so there are, like, in India there are so many culturally background people, because India has been a very diverse country, and there is so much cultural this things, and also these are the things which we look at the ethical. We always try to be to the, when we talk about these things, ethical mediation, all those things. So these are the things which I have already told, the neutrality, all those things. We always try to stick to those things. But because of the culturally things, some might be the like stereotype people, all those things can be included, can be the things. But that's like your recommendation also for us, like how, like when I was writing about the research, how US has the mediation things, how UK has, but in India we have ethically, like these things we look into because of these cultural things. So we always try to stick to the Mediation Act, where we mostly stick to the laws. We don't want to, like, from the past experience, we don't want to be the very culturally, like, to be the very stick to the culture, because it might be the for one person can believe in one thing, another person can believe in another thing. So it's very important to follow rules which have been given for mediators, other than these looking at to the cultural things. Yeah.
Right. Okay. Thank you.
Thanks, Sanya.
Well,
I mean, that is quite a tricky question. I'm just remembering, I once had a dissertation from a student, by a student who was from Goa in India. But in fact, his dissertation was a review of dispute resolution methods right around the subcontinent, Pakistan, Bangladesh, Nepal, and India, and it was really a large list. It was a very significant number of different local or national traditions. So it was a real glimpse of both challenge but a resource as well. Incredible traditions of dispute resolution in lots and lots of ways, which I think in many Western countries, our traditions have been longer ago forgotten by the arrival of the law. But that's another story for another day. That's 6 o'clock. It feels like maybe quite a neat moment to flip into the second half. Is everybody okay with that? I don't know if anybody wants to stand up and walk around. There we are. See if I can do that without tripping. I nearly fell over my chair. But if you're okay that we plough on, I think it would be really great now if we can go into our second section. So first of all, I'm going to invite Patrick Scott to present. And after Patrick, I will turn to Katerina. So Patrick, over to you.
Thank you, Charlie. Thank you. Like Roy, I'm from the University of Strathclyde Mediation Clinic in Scotland. Unlike Roy, I I think that 2 + 2 is 4, but maybe that's the single loop theory as opposed to the double loop. I'm just going to call my slides up here quickly. I'm going to talk about the intake process. The clinic, the Strathclyde Mediation Clinic, deals with mediations referred by the court. And the first stage in the process is an intake has to be done by somebody. And Sanya, to answer your question earlier, that is where somebody has to contact the parties based on the contact details supplied by the court and ascertain whether they in fact do want to mediate and get certain details and certain facts relating to the matter. Now, there are two options available, and we follow both of these in the clinic. You can either have the intake done by a third party or by the mediator who's going to be doing the mediation. And I'm going to discuss the difference between the two processes and the benefits that I believe relate to the intake being done by the mediator. But let's first look at the third party, who's somebody in the clinic, could be one of the administrators, could be one of the students, a mediator who does intake work, but the point is the work is separate from the actual mediation. It's done by somebody different to the person who's going to be doing the mediation. If the intake's done by a third party, that of course requires extra capacity because you need this person, you need somebody to be able to do the intake, contact the parties and get certain information from them. Also, this person, the intake party, is not always in a position to answer all of the questions that may be raised by one of the parties, particularly with regard to the process. And the reason for that is obvious, because mediators follow slightly different procedures. They have a slightly different process. Some mediators prefer doing most of the mediation, if not all of the mediation, in a joint session. Others may prefer to use more private sessions. Others may prefer to use a sort of an equal combination of joint and private sessions. And there may be other questions particular to that mediator that the person doing the intake, if it's a third party, would not necessarily be able to answer, simply because they don't know who the mediator is going to be at that stage. At the time when the intake is done, a mediator hasn't yet been assigned to the matter. So that person doing the intake would not really have any knowledge of some of the finer details of how the mediation is going to take place. And then there's a certain amount of duplication, particularly with mediators who like to commence the mediation with a private session. I'm one of those. I don't like to go into a mediation cold, into a joint session with the parties, unless I've had a private session with each of those parties. So if you have somebody doing the intake, which to some extent, but perhaps to a lesser extent, equates to a pre-mediation session or a private session before the mediation, and if the mediator then wants to have another private session with the parties, there is a certain amount of duplication. When the mediator does the intake, it's essentially part of the mediation process. I'm never quite sure what to call this first stage of the process, whether it's an intake that you're having with the parties, whether it's a pre-mediation meeting, or whether it's actually a private session. I actually think that it's probably a bit of each of those, because you are doing what is in essence an intake, but you're also having a pre-mediation meeting, and you are in fact having a private session where you're actually starting the mediation process during the stage of the mediation. One of the benefits, of course, is that it helps the mediator to build up trust with the parties. You get to meet the parties in advance of the mediation. And these intakes, pre-mediation meetings, private sessions, call them what you will, they would take place some time prior to the mediation. So you actually get a chance to meet the parties, talk to them, you can build up trust with them. it relieves the workload of the intake mediators, because you've now got the mediator who's going to be doing the mediation, actually doing the pre-stage process as well. You can deal with all of the pre-mediation issues that may arise, which to a large extent would also be dealt with by the intake mediator or the party doing the intake, but you're able to deal with those issues perhaps to some extent more fully than the person doing the intake, because you can answer questions like, what process are you going to follow? Are you going to commence in a joint session? Are you going to commence with private sessions? Or how are you actually going to conduct this mediation? And then importantly, and listening to what was being said earlier about the benefits of mediation clinics and how it helps us to gain experience and hone our skills in mediation, it's good experience to be dealing with this first stage of the mediation. Because outside of the clinic experience, if you're a mediator and you're handling a mediation from the referral stage, nobody's going to give you an intake form. Nobody's going to do the intake for you and give you all the particulars that you need, the details of the parties. You need to do that yourself. And by doing that within the clinic, you're actually gaining that experience and learning those additional skills, which are an essential part of a mediation practice. Now, the content of the discussion that you'd have, if you're doing the intake as a third party, you would ask a number of questions and you would get into some detail with the parties. You'd want the details of the case and the court. You'd want the contact details of the parties. You'd ask them about the amount of the claim. You'd get the basic details of the claim and in some instances, quite a bit of detail about the claim. And you'd explain the mediation process as far as you're able, because you're not sure which mediator is actually going to be doing the matter. And you would try and answer any questions that the parties have. And all of that you would record. In the clinic, we use a standard form where all of these particular details are completed. And that intake form would ultimately go to the mediator who's assigned to do the mediation. So the mediator who's then appointed to do the mediation would receive an intake form in respect of both parties and would then have all of that information that the person doing the intake has got from the parties. Now, if the mediator who's going to be doing the mediation does this first stage of the process, there would be additional information that would be forthcoming. I, for example, would discuss the case in greater detail with the parties because I regard this as an initial private session. I'm actually getting information from the parties to carry the mediation forward. At that stage, I would even explore settlement options with the parties. How do they see, it's an early stage, but how do they see this matter possibly resolving? What needs to be done to try and get a resolution? I'd ascertain, I did a pre-mediation meeting or intake session, private session this afternoon. I ascertained from the parties that there had been an offer made, which had been rejected. The offer had come from the claimant, a proposal. We prepared to settle on this basis. It was rejected. I was able to ascertain whether that offer is still on the table. When we get to do the joint session with the parties, is that still an option, or is that now been taken off because it's been rejected? I asked the parties whether the amount that was suggested could be paid in installments, if there's a cash flow problem with the respondent. Is that an option that the claimant would consider? The answer was absolutely. If we can get a settlement, the offer's still on the table, and we're quite happy to accept installments. So these are all things, this is information that I'm gathering to help me when I get to the first joint session with the parties. I'm able to explain to the parties the process that I will follow, not just a generalized process that an intake person would expect a mediator usually to follow, but I can tell them exactly what I'm going to be doing. I'm able to test the parties' ability to manage Zoom. In the clinic, most intakes are done telephonically. I always have this pre-mediation meeting with the parties in the same format as I'm going to be doing the mediation. So if the mediation is going to be done on Zoom, and the majority of them are in fact done on Zoom, I would basically insist that the parties meet me on Zoom for that pre-mediation meeting, because then I'm able to ensure that they're able to access Zoom, that they've downloaded the app, that they're familiar with it. And when we get to the initial joint session, they're comfortable with the way Zoom works. And not often, but it happens from time to time that when I have this pre-mediation meeting on Zoom, it sometimes takes a party 5 to 10 or 15 minutes to be able to connect to the meeting because they've never used Zoom before. If that happened when we started the mediation, it causes discomfort. It brings the party into the mediation feeling uncomfortable, feeling stressed about not being able to connect to the meeting. The other party gets frustrated because they're having to wait 5 or 10 or 15 minutes for the one party to join the meeting. But I iron out those problems at this pre-mediation stage. I can explain the breakout rooms to the parties. Many of them are not familiar with that. And I can test the breakout rooms with the parties. I put them in breakout rooms. It's very easy to do, but they then feel comfortable when we get to the mediation. They know what to expect. When I talk about breakout rooms, when we come to the joint session, they know what it is. And sometimes, not always, but sometimes I even start doing a bit of reality testing at this early stage. In our small claims court, it's called Simple Procedure in Scotland, we have a cap on expenses, costs, judicial expenses that can be awarded to the parties. And I often raise that with them at this pre-mediation meeting, so that I'm starting to prepare them for what is to come at the joint session. In summary, if you've listened to what I've been saying, I think you can pick up that I believe that for the mediator to do this initial intake process is preferable to a third party doing the intake. However, I would like to add to that, that it's not always easy to find mediators who are prepared to commit to that, because there is quite a bit of additional work involved. And I think that a lot of mediators doing work in clinics may find some comfort in receiving a referral of a mediation and being given intake forms with all the details that they need. So it may be difficult sometimes to get sufficient mediators to be able to run with the case from the initial referral. But as I mentioned when I started this presentation, in our clinic, the Strathclyde Clinic, we actually able to utilize both options. We have intakes being done in the clinic and the cases then being referred to mediators, and we have a few mediators who operate the other system of doing the intakes and the pre-mediation meetings themselves. So thank you for your time.
Thank you, Patrick. That was a commendable 15 minutes top to tail. Thanks so much. So if you're able to stop sharing.
I'm trying to.
Should be a little red button, I think, on your Zoom screen. If you sometimes I find that I have to click on escape to get the control.
There we go. There we go. My people on the screen were covering the button.
Excellent. Thanks so much. So let's just continue as we did before. I'm going to now invite Katerina, if I could, to similarly you give us your insight into mediation clinic in the Czech Republic.
Yes. So my name is Kateřina Macigová, and with my teacher, Dr. Lenka Hola, we prepare a presentation for students as the hope of mediation in the Czech Republic. We are from Faculty of Law of Palacký University in Olomouc in the Czech Republic. First of all, thank you for inviting us for this conference. First of all, I will introduce the concept of the presentation. The first, I will speak about the situation in the Czech Republic. After that, about mediation courses, which are teaching at our Faculty of Law in Olomouc. The main point of our presentation is our mediation clinic, which I will introduce. The third point is the Center for Conflict Resolution and Mediation, also in our faculty. And the last one is about International Scientific Conference of Mediation. So the first is the situation in the Czech Republic, situation in area of education in mediation. In the picture, you can see our faculty in Olomouc. We have 4 faculties in the Czech, faculties of law, I'm sorry, in the Czech Republic, in Olomouc, in Prague, in Brno, and in Plzeň. One of the student investigate in terms of her diploma thesis area education in mediation, and she investigated the attention of faculties in this issue. One of the conclusions of this research was, and now I will say very modestly, that Faculty of Law in Olomouc is a leader and the supporter of education in mediation. The second place has Faculty of Law in Prague, but they focuses on competitions, but they are very successful, but a little bit less than us in education and practice and so on. So, like I said, Olomouc focuses on science and research, education, and practice. So now I would like to tell you about some courses and programs which are teaching at our Faculty of Law. First is out-of-court dispute resolution methods, which the main aim is gaining knowledge of out-of-court dispute resolution methods, and they build on consensus and conciliatory approaches. And also the emphasis is on interdisciplinary approach. The second is conflict resolution and mediation. The aim of this subject is to introduce the nature and basic characteristics of conflicts, people reactions, different life situations, and possibilities of resolution of the conflicts. And the main aim of this subject is on mediation method, introduce to student what is mediation and so on. The next one is negotiation. The aim of the course is to gain knowledge of the negotiation methods and its aspects, and students to be able to choose an appropriate negotiation style in relation to the subject, and they will know some basic negotiation skills. And the last one and the most important is mediation clinic. Mediation clinic is special because it's taught only in Olomouc in our law faculty, and it was established in 2021, and it was part about it was part of clinic legal education. Now mediation clinic is a separate subject, and it cooperates with clinic legal education and other regional mediation centers. In mediation clinic, students will learn how to structure and conduct the mediation process, and also using some active listening and negotiation techniques. The mediation clinic, we have 2 courses, Mediation Clinic 1 and Mediation Clinic 2. So now I would like to describe both of these subjects. Mediation Clinic 1, the aim of this mediation clinic is orientation of students in methods of alternative dispute resolution and their possibilities. So this is a little bit more some theory. The aim is to promote and develop practical mediation skills and mediation knowledge. Also, they will know some principles of mediation process, characteristics of relationships, again, people's reactions, and some life situation, application areas of mediation, ethical aspects, and also legal conditions of its provision in the Czech Republic. So students will be able to establish a respectful and trusting relationships with the parties to a dispute, navigate their conflict situation, plan an appropriate course of action based on the subject matter of the dispute and their needs and interests. The mediation clinic 2, it's a different because the main aim is to provide mediation in real cases. And also the gain competencies for independent mediation in future practice. So students will work on real mediation cases. They will select a case which are based on the criteria, a case which is suitable for mediation, and in cooperate with the teacher will carry out the mediation practically. So like I said, they work on real mediation cases, a selection of a case suitable for mediation. After they will go through the preparatory phase, mediation itself, evaluation, and in the end, conclusions. They will learn how to structure and conduct the mediation process using, in particular, active listening and negotiation skills. Students will also develop their personal and professional skills. So this is the part of the mediation clinics too. The next leader of our faculty in education in mediation is the Center for Conflict Resolution and Mediation. And I'm so sorry. And this is, it has been part of the law faculty since 2023, so it's very, very new. The center supports all mediation-related activities like science, research, education, and practical application. So like I said, it's a leader at our law faculty. And students play a very, very important role in this center because they voluntarily participate to a lot of activities. First activity, which I want to introduce, is our experiential educational project called Mediation in Schools. This is one of the main projects of the center, and students of the, or voluntary students of the center was in primary school in Olomouc, and the workshop was divided into 3 blocks. First and second block was only disputes resolution and describe the dispute resolution. And the third last block was about practice of mediation. The workshop was very positive because the evolution of the class teacher was that children know what mediation is, and they know there is a better way to resolve a dispute than to go to the court, and they understand different perspectives on life situation, and they know that people's reaction can be different. So it was very positive project, and we are working on to continue in this project, and in future we will visit another schools. Like I said, the students participate and do a lot of activities. And the last last activity, but the last point of the presentation, which I want to introduce, is International Scientific Conference of Mediation, which is the only scientific conference in the Czech Republic. And this conference organized our law faculty in Olomouc, and it will be on the 6th of December. So it's going to be the following Friday or the next Friday, and it's the 7th annual. So students help with the preparation and organization from the center, and of course another students of the law faculty, but it's a very close with the center. The conference has 3 sections: theory and research. The second section is practice and education, and the last one, and the new for the first time in this conference, is a student section. The section named Students Mediation, and we will discuss in this section about future education in mediation with another students and students from our faculty and another faculties and professionals in this area. So we will see what conclusions and the next steps in education in the mediation we will have in our faculty. And in the end, I would like to say that Mrs. Pauline McKay and Mr. Charlie Irving will have a contribution in our conference, and we appreciate, and we will looking forward to our conference. So that's it, and thank you so much for your attention.
Well, thank you so much, Katerina. Again, elegantly kept to time. That's really actually fascinating. I have been to Czech Republic before to teach mediation, and I know it's a really fascinating country with an awful lot going on. So thank you for that insight. You raced through a lot. Thank you to Patrick for your insight into the work that goes on before mediation. So once again, I'd like to invite questions. I actually see one from Pauline already in the chat. So is that okay if I ask that question as our mediation clinic coordinator? Pauline's asking, do students get class credits for taking part in the mediation clinic 1 or 2?
Yes, it's a part of winter semester. I don't know if you have it also in UK, but we have winter and summer semester. So yes, they will have a credits for mediation clinic.
Helpful to know, and in some regards, makes it closer to the model in the US, which I'm familiar with, but it's not the model we have at the moment in our clinic. that might be something for the future, and I'm sure there's lots of different people on the call. So that's good to know. I'd like to know more detail. Can I invite other questions for either of our speakers? While people are thinking, I've got a question as well, Katerina, and actually I see Liesl has one too. But is that okay? I'll just ask mine. Katerina, I suppose I'm curious about what next then for students. I work in a university. Universities are very concerned about employability, and I wonder what happens next? What are the opportunities for students after they graduate?
In the Czech Republic?
Yeah.
They will also participate on center. It's not only for students, but it's for graduated students also to participate. And we don't have any other options in the Czech Republic because, like I said, Olomouc is a leader in this area, and it's not too much discuss this term or this area in the Czech Republic globally. Maybe in Charles University in Prague, but they focus on competition.
But I suppose I meant outside the university for practicing as a mediator, as a professional mediator. Is that something that's beginning to be a possibility in the Czech Republic?
In the Czech Republic, there are some courses for practicing mediations, but not too much. It's very still new area, mediation and mediators, and the Czech Republic has about 10 million people, and we have only 300 mediators, so it's very small number.
Okay. You're not alone. Scotland has its struggles, I think, in this department. Thanks very much. Liesl, you have a question.
Hello, yes. I have a question for Patrick. I wonder if you can hear me okay? I'm still in the car.
I can.
I can imagine one of the most frustrating parts of modern life is when you go to professional service like a lawyer or a doctor or even a bank or insurance company, you have to explain yourself several times in your past from person to person. So I can imagine through listening to your presentation and thinking that parties might actually quite like it if the actual mediator does the intake, because it stops them having to maybe do that introductory explanation of their situation and their case again. Do you have any evidence that where the mediator isn't the person doing the intake, i.e. they've met two people, that they've said they're displeased with having to explain it from the start again? Is there any evidence of that?
I've not picked that up, Liesl, but as I mentioned in my presentation, there is a certain amount of duplication because obviously the parties tell their story, even if it's an abbreviated version to the intake part, the intake person, and then the mediator, when he or she comes into the matter, will want to also, although they've read the intake form, will also want to cover those facts and issues with the party. So there is that certain amount of duplication. What I do, and I didn't mention this earlier, but what I do, if I do get a referral via somebody who's already done the intake, I do like to start mediations with private sessions. And if I'm doing it myself from the start, I have that pre-mediation meeting. I don't like to have a private session in addition to the parties having had an intake session with the person doing the intake, but I still like to have that private session before we go into the joint session. So what I then do is when the mediation is arranged on the day of the mediation, I will actually commence the mediation with private sessions, and I'll ask the one party to join the mediation at say 10 o'clock if the mediation's at that time, and the other party to join at 20 past 10. And I will then have that pre-mediation stage, but I will then build it into the day of the mediation. So I don't inconvenience the parties by having them have to attend 2 separate sessions before the mediation.
Thank you.
Thanks, Patrick. Now, someone else had their hand up. Now I can't remember who it was. But it's gone down. Do you want to have another go? Was it you, Cordelia?
Yeah, I was just I was wondering something I wasn't entirely sure of asking, but I was just thinking, given the topic that Patrick's covered, it's more a question for Charlie and Pauline. Are we looking at changing the intake process for the clinic?
I think I maybe let Pauline answer that actually.
I don't imagine it's something that we're going to change. There's quite a lot of benefits as well of having the intake being done by an intake worker. We work with undergraduate students and they're getting experience of working with parties directly and gaining experience. Now they're given training as well. And they look at the intake form as if they were a mediator, what information is it that they would need in order how to progress with the mediation. So that the training is quite detailed for that as well. So I can see this how the pros of doing it by the mediator doing it, but there's also now benefits of it being shared with the intake worker as well. There's also the issue that some parties like to talk and they want to tell their story numerous times as well. So they do want to tell the intake worker, they do want to tell the mediator, and they'll still be talking about it after the mediation as well.
Thanks, Pauline.
Thanks, Pauline. Yes, probably a mixed model for some time to come. Yeah. Thanks, Lethal. I see Tom's just put his hand up. I think there's a question actually prior to that from Mary. For you, Katerina. Mary's interested in the peer mediation in schools, the work in schools, and wondering how the effectiveness is measured. And she understands you follow up with further mediation training skills in schools. Could you just share a bit more about that?
Our project is very on the beginning. Like I said, we was in primary school and children has about 10 years old because it was 5th class. But we had some surveys about this STEM, and the children drove some pictures and described them, and they want to try describe the picture and conflict on the paper, and I don't know how will be the future in this project, but we want to make a huge project and put this project to high school and some universities, like something what will help with education and mediation.
Thanks, Katerina. I think you've put your finger on a challenge, probably for all of us, measuring effectiveness. It's a continuous loop in a sense, and I think it's something probably there may come a stage where in some countries people vote with their feet, they choose it, but I think there's lots of places where that's still not the default in society. Thanks for that. Tom, you have a question.
It's for Patrick. I'm involved in the clinic doing the same sort of thing as Patrick is, and I find it extremely valuable to do the pre-mediation or intake, whatever you may want to call it, myself, because I think you build greater rapport. But I was wanting to ask Patrick, he coaches people in any other way in the pre-mediation for what's coming up, coaches them perhaps in how they might negotiate or how they might present themselves in their opening statements to defuse the situation.
Yes, I do. I do that if necessary, if I find that there's perhaps something that's going to complicate matters at the mediation, I would discuss that with the parties at this pre-mediation meeting. I'm also able to ascertain from that meeting who should start. Roy mentioned, I think earlier, the issue that we have of who starts the mediation. I would normally start with the claimant, but not always. If I think it's going to be more beneficial for the other party, the respondent, to start, then I'll do that, and I'm able to again gauge that from the from the pre-mediation meeting.
I found myself doing the same sort of thing. I just wondered whether other people agree with that or not.
Well, I do that. Yeah.
For introducing yourself into the process.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yes, I think there's a big debate. Some of you will know my first job in mediation was I was employed as an intake worker in a family mediation service and spent an hour to an hour and a half with each client before they went near a mediator. So it was interesting that was a practice which was very formative in my own practice. Although I eventually changed the model when I started managing the service so that more people got to do the intake work. It's almost the other way around. I reckon the intake work was so valuable for mediation, for mediator skills, that I wanted more people to be doing it. So I think that debate is, in a sense, it's not. I don't think it's an either or. It does strike me that there's lots of pros and cons, but there seems to be quite growing evidence, really, that most mediators recognize. Let me put it a simple way. I don't think most people are very interested in mediation as an abstract concept. But as soon as they've met a person and you say, shall we meet again? Would you work with me again? It's a completely different ball game. So anyway, my tuppence worth. So, have we any other questions? Because if not, I guess 6:45 that's our time. I know there are people earlier and much later in other parts of the world, so there's probably a civilized time to draw this to a close. I mean, I want to say a huge thank you to everybody on the call. This is an experiment for us, the first time we've done this, and just bringing together, in particular thanks to the folk who've done a lot of work to prepare for this, to Roy, to, I can't see her now, Sanya, I think she was off the call and back on it. Oh, I see you at the bottom of my screen. To Sanya, to Patrick, and to Katerina. I think maybe we'd all like to show our appreciation for the work you did in preparing for this, and I want to say a particular thanks to you. That was, yeah, fascinating and stimulating, and it does suggest that there's more to be said, more to be thought about what we're up to here. I think we're onto something with this clinical component of mediator education. Perhaps we will do it again sometime. It's really Pauline's baby. So Pauline, I think that thanks to you as well for organizing this and having the idea in the first place. It strikes me as something that we should be doing. Yeah. Again, we do have our own mediation clinic conference online, which is not just about I suppose, the academic component of it in March 28th, I believe. I should flag that up. Great. So I think at that, we will let you all go. I'm sure you've got places to go, people to see, and perhaps dinners to have, depending on the time of day. Farewell.
Thanks, Pauline. Thanks, Charlie. And thanks, everybody.